I am so excited about this conversation today. Clearly, my office is in my children's playroom at the moment in my life. So enjoy all the colorful surroundings. But I am so excited about fertilizing today. People kind of filter in and out of these free sessions, so I always record them so that if for some reason you have to jump in and out, you can come back at any point. And I will leave time at the end to answer your questions. And I will also put this into the email where the replay comes so that because there's a lot of information in this, and I don't necessarily want you to feel as if you to take a lot of notes because we're all so busy and I already took the notes for you. So I'm going to email them to you after this session once the replay is uploaded onto YouTube for you to check out. So I don't have like a display of all the information today. I wish I did, but I didn't exactly have all the time in the world with all the gardening. I'm sure you guys are all busy with your gardens too. And so I didn't have a good way to display this information. So that's also why I'm going to give you the notes at the end. I'm just going to talk through it because I think it's really pretty quick to understand, but also it will be really helpful. The key today is that we're going to talk about why we need to talk about fertilizing, especially as organic and low intervention gardeners. That's kind of the term that I like to use with people, is that I don't intervene a lot in my garden other than the fact that I tend to it. And I don't spray anything. I don't use neem oil. I don't use anything. The only thing I've ever used is I have used Bronner's with nymphs on for squash bugs. So I really don't use anything in the garden. I utilize what nature has. And once again, fertilizing is one of those things we don't have to use chemicals for. And fertilizing has also gotten a really bad rap, I feel like, in the organic gardening world and the lower intervention gardening world and homesteading and permaculture and all of this, because we're talking about chemicals when we're talking about fertilizing. And chemical fertilizers don't break down the same way or are as easy to uptake as organic ones are, because organic things are derived from nature. So when we're looking at them properly and actually doing the research on them, and so it's not bad because these things can actually be taken into the soil and into the plants more easily through proper watering. But the problem is that we also have utilized fertilizers to replace rebuilding our soil. All last month in our community, and then in the free course, a free workshop, I talked about soil. We talked a lot about it on the podcast, why soil structure is so important, how it is the first thing we need to think about more than even like what we choose to grow in our garden. It has to be it has to be the number one thing on our mind. And then the fertilizers are what help offset the structure of our soil. Like they fill in the gaps of what our compost cannot do. Because most compost, though it contains these macronutrients, which we're going to talk about in a minute, it doesn't contain, it mainly contains a lot of the micronutrients we need, which are like calcium and boron and iron and things like that are still really important. But we need these other ones brought in because they are the ones that are pulled out the most, and they can be hard to get back in even with really healthy, great compost. So today what I'm going to talk about is the three that we need the most. You're going to notice them on packages and when you're out buying fertilizers, because you do need to buy them. There are many of our plants, particularly our vegetables that we grow, that need these things throughout the season at various points. So we're going to talk about that. So first of all, I already kind of discussed like why compost isn't enough. It just doesn't contain all of the nutrients and everything that our plants need. It does a really good job, but it's not the only thing that is going to work. And sadly, and I wish it was that simple, but it is not. And it also is not as simple to understand what our plants need as just like getting a soil test or anything like that. But I am going to give you a high level of how to actually understand what your plants are needing, because they're the best indicators of what what we need to put in our soils. So we're not putting something in that the soil and plants don't need, so then it doesn't run off into our waterways, right? So we can really pay attention and learn by just kind of understanding these things on a high level even. So first of all, the main things that we're looking for when we're inputting fertilizers into our garden is that we're looking for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. And I'm going to go through what each one of these things do, because understanding what they do can tell us what our plants need. So that's the secret. So nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium are indicated on packages by NPK. And so just like from chemistry class, it's the same thing. So we're just utilizing those nutrients and understanding their place in our fertilizing journey, right, for our plants. So when we understand this, these can be synthetically brought in through chemicals, or they can be brought in through natural things. And I'm going to talk about how each one, different options for each one of these. And that's the notes that I can give you in the email today, because I feel like it's a lot. And, but we go deeper in this in the community. We're doing like a whole like Q&A session about fertilizing and how to understand it and everything like that. So it's a great way to dig in even deeper if this is fascinating to you or whatever. So so first of all, we're gonna go through. So what they each represent is, okay, I'm trying to think if I should talk about, okay, no, I think we'll go this way. I think it feels good. So nitrogen. So nitrogen we hear a lot about, and nitrogen is one of the easiest things to add. It's also the easiest thing to understand you need in your garden, because it basically is how green your plants are. So if you've ever like watched after it rains, miss rain would be wonderful. Everything just goes green so fast, and it's because we've stimulated the soil to make it easier for the plants to uptake nitrogen. And so they almost immediately become like super green and super beautiful, and it is wonderful. But nitrogen is what makes our plants so green. So it makes strong leaf growth, overall like vigor, and that, like I said, that greenness of the plant. And so this is really important for certain plants, like lettuces, and kale, a lot of brassicas, they need this. The more nitrogen that they've received, the greener they're going to be. And this just shows overall health of the plant too, is when they're so green, because they've had enough nitrogen. Now, we can have too much nitrogen, but for the most part, nitrogen is one of the things that is depleted from our soils the most often, because it's needed by every single plant. So it usually, when you find a vegetable or plant fertilizer that's organic, it's usually the number that's gonna be usually the highest is the nitrogen, and it should be. So there's different ways to add these, and I just want to say that if you're a vegan or you don't prescribe to purchasing meat from slaughterhouses, it's really important to understand some of these natural ways that we bring these things in, because many of them are byproducts of slaughterhouses. So you'll notice them as I go through them. And just because I talk about them does not mean I endorse that. You can create these things yourself, and some farmers will actually give you the things to do that. And it would be wonderful if we could start sourcing these things from smaller local farms in order to feed our plants and our vegetables. So anyways, these can be added by bone meal, which is a byproduct, alfalfa meal, feather meal, also a byproduct, cottonseed meal, horse manure, compost tea, fish fertilizer, also a byproduct, and chicken manure. So fish fertilizer, though, can actually be a positive thing, because fish farming is done on various ways and in certain things. And so that's the only one I put a caveat next to, because if you're going to have one of those, as it's sort of on the edge of how it depends on where they source it from. And because that's a little more vague. So I just want to note that for anyone who does care. Phosphorus is the next one. So phosphorus is the key nutrient for stronger fruit development, root development, flowering, and stem structure. That's major, okay? So many times we are not thinking about that, like if you've ever had plants that are just kind of wobbly, maybe their leaves just aren't like going well, if your flowers aren't developing very large, like if you're struggling with cosmos or things like that. Sometimes I get messages about people's cosmos being really bushy, and then they're just not producing any blossoms. It could be you're higher in nitrogen and not high enough in phosphorus. And so a lot of our flowering plants, flowers and herbs and things like that, they do want plenty of phosphorus in the soil. So we have to make sure that this is one of the things we add in. Now, this comes from a lot of different things that are also byproducts, but like I said, there are different ways. The one that I think is the best is composted manure, particularly from llamas and hoofed animals. So many farmers that grow these or have these animals grow like raising on their farm alongside the rest of their vegetables. They have them for the very reason that their composted manure is like gold when it comes to phosphorus. So if you know anyone who's raising goats or llamas or alpacas, um, they are going to be truly, sheep are also really great. Anything in that area, they are going to have a higher phosphorus level to their poop, and the composting is short, like the composting to it is shorter. So I always suggest to people who grow flowers and things like that, use composted manure because it's from these animals, because it's going to be your highest like fruit and flowering development over chickens and cows, because those are going to be higher in nitrogen. And they can also be higher in salts, but you can change the pH. That's another whole conversation for another day. But bone meal is the other one, fish meal, and then rock phosphate, which is like granite dust, which is a byproduct of like granite production and mining and things like that. So take that for what you want. Like all these things come from different places. So, and then lastly, we have potassium, which is also one that we just don't think about. When I first started understanding fertilizing, I didn't even realize that like potassium was like a major thing for plants. But this is why like you'll see like some Instagram videos of people like taking banana peels and like putting them underneath their plants. It's because of the potassium. So potassiums are key to the immune system basically of your plant. So if your plant is just overall struggling, or you're concerned about disease, like if you had blight that year or the year before, it's really good to like help your plants out by like boosting their immune system with more potassium. They're just going to be able to be more resilient to things, just like humans. So we're not that different. And the best way that I have found to add this is through wood ash, which is just like from burning wood, like biochars, things like that, and then seaweed. So seaweed can be sustainably harvested, and it is a really great option. So you can definitely add that in there as one of the things. So if we understand that, we understand all the ways in which these three key nutrients are playing a part in our garden and in our fertilizing, how do we start paying attention so that we actually know what our plants need? First is understanding those three things and the part they play, but then also watching and observing for these things. Watch for the plant's growth, like how quickly is that plant growing? Some of these things also have to do with watering, heat also, but for the most part, if our plants aren't getting the right nutrients, these things also are playing a major part. Because even right now, like we've had a lot of heat, we've had a lot of weird watering, because it's not rain, it's not, there's these different things, but still healthy soil will produce strong, vigorous plants. And that's what I'm seeing in my garden right now, because I utilize my chicken's manure. It is high in nitrogen. All the plants are very green, even despite the irregularity of heat, consistency, and not having rain. So, and the watering just being weird. So the next thing would be fruiting and flowering production. Your plant should be really showing signs of doing really well with flowering and fruiting. If they are not, then, and they're not, that also depends on the size, obviously, like when you put the start in right now. But if they're struggling to produce flowers consistently, or they're just starting to create the bud, but they're not like opening very quickly, and quickly meaning like 2 to 3 weeks after forming a bud, then it could be, connected to the phosphorus in the soil. So that may be one way to pay attention. The flavors of your veggies and fruit. Well fertilized and healthy plants will produce great tasting vegetables and fruit. And this is just there are certain vegetables that are very triggered by heat, and those would be like a lot of our spring veggies. But when we're talking about summer and fall, a lot of the flavor depends on the nutrient level of the plant. So your tomatoes are going to taste better, obviously, by being friends with their basil and carrots and borage and everything, but they also need to have plenty of nutrients to produce great fruit. And so it's so important for them to have the phosphorus and the potassium in there to just really do really well. So they'll taste better, I promise you. And so will your lettuces and things like that when they have enough nitrogen. And then lastly is just that overall health and vigor of your plant. There are certain plants that are going to trigger the signs of their health to you more clearly than others. Tomatoes, for instance, will start turning purple on their leaves if they are not getting the right nutrient uptake. Um, sometimes I notice that after I plant them, some of them will turn purple, particularly if they're a purple variety, but then they usually even out and become very green later once they're more well established and their roots are established better. If they haven't, then I know that they need a feed. And so now we're going to talk about what do I use, because I think it's helpful just to hear what other people go and pick out. Fertilizing does not need to be expensive. Like I said, I have a couple friends with alpacas, and so in our flower beds every single year, I go and I get buckets and buckets and buckets of manure from them, and I sprinkle it through all of our flower beds, and it does really well. It doesn't have to be fully composted in order to remove pathogens. But I do solely use it just in our flower beds in general. I don't add it into our vegetable beds because I have flower bed areas. This is going to be really helpful to almost any plants that produce leaves, and you can put it around your trees, you can put it around your um, flowers, you can put it around berry bushes, anything like that. It's just it's gold, and it's such a great thing, and it's always there. It's plentiful. Anyone who raises those animals will tell you that. And then the next thing is I clean out our chicken coop once a year, and when I do, I put all of the bedding into one area, and then we spread it in the fall after we are done in the garden, and our chickens also go through and clean the whole garden for us. And so then I leave it all winter, and that decomposes itself over winter, and then that's super high in nitrogen in our lower garden that is all in ground, because it's harder to control the in ground soil than it is the raised beds. So I utilize that, and it's really great for our vegetables. And then lastly, when I am doing what you call foliar feeds, which is a water feed over the leaves, I utilize fish and seaweed emulsion. Now, it does have a smell to it, as you would assume. I dilute it, it still has a smell. So I highly suggest putting it on in the evening. And if you have animals, make sure that they have gone. And then put on, like as the sun is setting, you put it on. And then I make sure my animals are inside. And then I will run the water over the top. So by the time it is morning and it is dry, there are no flies, there is no interest in it. It is usually found its way into the soil through the watering, and it is fine. So it does stink though, I won't lie, but it works very well. And most of the organic farmers that I know, this is also what they prefer to use. And it's just a very, for the most part, environmentally friendly option for additional fertilizing. So that I have found. You can use things like worm castings, mushroom compost, things like that. I always suggest varying your fertilizer so that you're making sure that you're just shifting things up, because it's great, just like our bodies want varying types of vegetables and food to build our microbiome. The same thing goes for fertilizing. So just like our soil, like I suggested in the soil thing, to make sure that you use varying types of compost and things like that over time, because it will just change the microbes within your soil. The same thing goes for fertilizing, especially when we're using organic. So I always like to leave 10 minutes, and I think it's just you and me, Colleen. So we had like 30 people sign up for this, but they must just want the replay, which is great. That's totally fine. Did you have any questions? If not, it is okay. You're on mute.
Is it okay now?
Yes. we're good.
All right. Well, it was good to hear about the compost or the manures and things, because we've been using a lot of that. Our son has a farm and we live right next door and we help him farm. And I think you guys have met. He has Anna Very Fine Foods. So he has a meat club.
Yes. Yes.
Adam. Yeah.
Oh my God,
Yeah.
amazing. Yes, I know.
Yeah. 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 Adam Weinrich. And so I'm Colleen Weinrich. And so, yeah, it's been great because this is probably our fourth year having raised beds here. And so we have 25 acres and we're next to him and they have 50. And so we kind of scoot back and forth. In fact, as soon as I'm done here, I'm going to be heading over there to get back into the garden. And it's been really helpful using the manures, from the farm. Yeah. Um, they don't have alpaca, but they have sheep and goats and cows and pigs and chickens. And so I'm still kind of figuring that out because I found with the compost this year, they brought a lot over with the tractor, dumped it in our raised beds, and it's just very chunky, so that was a bit of work. Last year I think we strained it like through a big screen that my husband built. Yeah, so with your chicken manure, so you clean that out in the fall and then it's all winter obviously, and so then yeah.
Yeah, and it's a rotation. So like we have one that's the curing one and one that's the fresh one. And so the one that's cured is the one
Mm,
the previous fall into the garden. And the one that is fresh goes into that, waiting to cure
right,
area. And then
right.
keeps rotating. And so yeah, and it works really well. Like we use pine bedding, which some people don't like putting pine in their gardens, but mainly it's the needles to be concerned about, not the wood itself, because it's so dried at that point when it comes in. It doesn't have all the oils and everything as it decomposes. So some people will also like oddly like burn it and and then it becomes a really great like biochar option. You can do that as well. But for the most part, I do it over hay. And like a lot of people will do straw or whatever that's been cut before the seed has formed, and that's what they'll lay to protect their garden over the winter. But we just use the chicken's bedding. And and then we just put more compost in the fall or in the spring on top. And it does really well. So that's how we've built our beds over the past 3 years. So
Did you use any um like cover crop in your raised beds at all ever?
I I think cover crops work really well when you have large swaths of land. And I think it's a really effective way to build soil. But when we're in raised beds, what you
Right.
in order to utilize them is so intensive. And it's fun if you want to get really chemical about it and like be like, oh, the chemical makeup of this plant is gonna be really helpful because I grow tomatoes in here. And you want to get like really exact. But for most home gardeners, I think it's way too intense of something to do. But it works like if you are like rotating land in a regenerative way, when you're using
Yeah.
clear that land again and they clear the cover crop and everything and then and their hooves are going through it and like all of that, that's brilliant, like that's so good. But for raised beds and like just the normal home gardener, I think cover crops are a lot of work that is not necessary.
Well, the problem we tried it for the first time this past year. So of course we planted them last fall. And then of course, because they're raised beds, you can't just get your rototiller in there. So we have 8 pretty large raised beds. And yeah, it was just a lot of work to get that turned over.
It is.
Um, yeah, so I don't think we'll do that again. I kind of experimented. I did half of the beds with a cover crop and we used rye. And then the other 4 beds, I used straw for the winter. Yeah, yeah, and we'll definitely use the hay or the straw again. Yeah.
It's so great. And man, and you have like an endless disposal of like great manure, like like that's the good stuff. And
Uh,
it's, I think it would be really interesting because and this is such a odd business idea, but because they're raising so many animals, doing processing and everything, it would, if there was a way to like keep bones and then have them turn into bone meal, like you,
yeah.
there's no local source for bone meal. And that's like such a unique and such a
Uh,
powerful, like just additive in the garden. And so,
I'll tell Adam that. Yeah, I'm writing that down. Yeah, about the bone meal. Yeah, they they take the animals to Triple R, so they don't really do it here, but yeah, yeah, it's interesting. It's we've got a lot going on over there, and people are the customers that get the meat, they're always saying, well, when are you going to start selling your vegetables? I'm like, no, thank you. I have a hard enough time keeping up with just what we have here for our family. Yeah.
yeah.
So
Well, and you're feeding your all of yourselves too on top of everything. So
yeah, yeah.
I
No,
think,
this was really good, Megan. And I have to say, like, I look at your Instagram, you're doing a good job with that. Yeah. And because I've been gardening for, I mean, I'm like, of course, old enough to be your mother, and I've been gardening for a really long time, but we lived overseas for a long time. So now that we're all here, and my husband and I have been here probably about 7 years now. And then Adam and Don, came about 4 years ago. So this is really the most intense gardening I've ever done. And even at 70, obviously there's always things to learn.
oh,
And yeah, so I learned a lot from your site. And then, yeah, and I really like the other two sites that I'm sure you look at. Nikki Jabor, I think is how you pronounce her name. Yeah, and I've got some of her books. And then the other gal I discovered last year is, these are cold places, right? She lives out in Nova Scotia. And then Meg Cowden, I think is the other name. She's in Minneapolis. She's in Minnesota.
cool.
Um, yeah, and she's very good. She's written a couple different books. Her newest one is on succession planting. Um, and this is the first year I'm working on that. And yeah, I'm hoping to have some success with that. Do you do much of that?
Yeah, it's actually how I learned to avoid squash vine borers is through succession planting. And
Oh,
do it with cilantro all summer. We do it with in different areas because it bolts really easily and it's a great way to avoid it. We do it with. Um, I also do it behind certain plants, and like companion planting is a really good model for succession. So
yeah.
it feeds another, and so you don't want to like put kale in the fall after your tomatoes because that will hinder the kale's growth and like things like that. So I utilize it in that way too. And then I also do it with green beans. Like we're constantly like seeding green beans every 2 weeks. Um,
Okay.
so yeah, that's like the
Great.
so
Yeah, and the hardest part for me right now is just like, well, I have my notebook, and even though you said don't take notes, I was a teacher for 35 years, so I love to take notes. And yeah, and it's just like trying to keep on top of that succession planting. Like, oh yeah, it says here I need to put beans in this week. So yeah, and then continue to do that. So yeah, anyway, this was helpful. It was fun chatting with you.
I know you too. It was great to meet you, even virtually. Like I've been wanting to get into the meat shares over there for a while, so I think we need to just do it. It's just been busy, and I just keep telling you,
Right.
always good to
Yeah.
have your stuff now at Oriana, but I that's
Yeah.
meat, and so I just am like, oh, okay, we needed to get.
Well, some people are doing is Adam is offering like I think it's $100 kind of like a sample package.
Oh, cool.
And so, yeah, he's had pretty good luck with that with people who just aren't sure, or, they're just thinking like, I'm not sure I want to sign on for 4 months. And now it's kind of fun because he has Boss Mouse cheese, and then somebody is selling flowers through him. And then he also has a dairy farmer who brings over his kefir and his milk. So that's kind of fun. So they have, if you look at his website, yeah, you'll see, it's kind of a nice variety. Yeah.
He has that business mind. He's done it really well. I'm
Yeah.
impressed with when I met with them years ago before they had moved here,
Yeah.
and I met with them for coffee, and I was like so excited for them because I was like, I think you're really going to do this well and right, and I've been incredibly impressed. So I have a lot of friends that are um, Meet Share members, and they love it. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's going well. Yeah, it's a lot of work there. I mean, he's got a whole gang out there right now. And that's what's kind of fun now that we just built a new house here. And so we just moved in a few months ago. So we look out and the sheep greet us in the morning or the cows. Yeah, it's really beautiful. Like you should come over sometime just to see.
yeah,
Yeah, it's really beautiful. Yeah, it's a very special, and
I'll
we get
share.
on our little golf cart and drive over there and work in the garden. And my husband does a lot on the farm.
Oh,
But yeah, come sometime or, like text Adam or email me and maybe we can set something up just so you can come and see. And your little kids would love to see all the animals.
love it. They absolutely would. So
Yeah, right.
I run our school's middle school gardening club, and we'd like to take them to different farms. So that
Mm,
fun tour. We did it with Loma. Um, we did the interlochen hydroponic garden that they have, and then like
right.
didn't do anything with the animals. So, and we just got chickens at the school. So that might be really exciting for them to see.
It would. Yeah. We just had a field trip last week and that was a lot of fun. Yeah. But good. Well, Megan, great chatting with you.
Yeah,
Thanks for the information.
absolutely. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the weekend.
Okay.
Okay,
Yeah, I'm heading over there to pull those weeds.
perfect.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.